All right, everyone, buckle up because we're about to go deep on some American history stuff. And this time we're diving into Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Loewen. And let me tell you, this book is seriously eye-opening.
It really is, yeah. I mean, Lowen's work is, it's like shining a spotlight on how the history we think we know, the stuff we learned way back in school,
Hmm.
isn't always, well, the whole picture. And sometimes, and this is kind of crazy, sometimes it's just straight up inaccurate.
Yeah, it's wild, right? And we've all had those huge and insanely heavy textbooks, right? Like, I swear mine weighed a ton. But Loewen actually says that this whole giant textbook thing is part of the problem.
Yeah, for sure. When you've got a textbook that's like 1,000 pages long, there's this massive push to like simplify everything, condense it down. And sometimes they just leave important stuff out entirely, all to make it fit. And that's where some of those lies sneak in.
And get this, Lowen found that a lot of the textbook authors, they don't even get the same respect as like academics doing original research. It's like they're stuck in this system that doesn't value what they do, which makes you wonder, if that even affects how good the textbooks actually are.
Hmm. That's a really interesting thought. It's like this hidden bias going on behind the scenes might actually, I don't know, maybe it changes how history is presented to students. You know, like maybe that's why so many people find history textbooks, well, kind of boring.
Yeah, totally. So we've got these huge textbooks created in this system that doesn't always care about like telling a good story. And what do? We get these super clean, way too simple versions of history where fascinating people get turned into, I don't know, like cardboard cutouts.
Exactly. He calls it heroification. And, like, think about Helen Keller, right? We
Hmm.
all know her story, or at least the basic one we learned in school. But Lowen says she was a huge socialist activist, which is something you don't really hear about.
It's like they're only showing us these perfect heroes and not the messy, complicated parts of who they really were. And it's not just people, it's whole movements and ideas that get pushed aside too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything that's seen as too radical or, goes against the usual story, it tends to get, well, minimized. Just think back to when you were in school, like, whose voices were missing from those history lessons, do you think?
That's a really good question for everyone listening. And makes you think, right, like, how does that affect the way we understand the past? And what about how we see the world right now, even the future?
It's huge. And a good example is the whole thing with Viking settlements here in North America. There's actually a lot of evidence suggesting Vikings were here way before Columbus, like maybe even paved the way for him. But that's not really what you see in textbooks, is it? It kind of feeds into this like Eurocentric bias.
Totally. It's like they're saying, yeah, Vikings were here, whatever, but Columbus discovering America, and now that's the story you're going with.
Right. And that's the point. It's not just about what's being said, but whose story is being told and like the lens it's being told through.
Yeah, and that's where Lowen's book gets really interesting. He's not just pointing out what's wrong or missing. He makes you think about why those things are there in the first place. It's like we learn about how Europeans just, conquered the Americas because they had better technology, but Lowen makes it way more complicated than that.
Yeah, he really gets into how devastating those European diseases were for Native Americans.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a simple conquest, it was this whole biological catastrophe.
Right. Like it almost feels like we're taught history as this nice, neat story. And in reality, it was probably, I don't know, way more complicated.
Exactly. Lowen says that this whole thing of trying to simplify history, it actually ends up giving us some pretty big misunderstandings. Like he uses the example of the Dutch buying Manhattan.
Oh, yeah, that whole story.
Yeah.
They got Manhattan for like a handful of beads or something.
Right, right. But Lowen points out that, get this, they actually paid the wrong tribe.
Oh,
Like the people they gave the beads to, they didn't even own the land.
wow. Talk about a steal, right? I'm kidding, of course. But see, this is why I love this book. There are all these moments where you're just like, wait, what? And it makes you totally rethink everything you thought you knew.
Totally. It just shows how easy it is for historical narratives to get like, I don't know, twisted to fit a certain story, even if it
Yeah.
means leaving out really important stuff. And this whole thing about sanitizing and simplifying history, it's not even just about the stories themselves. Lowen says that even the pictures textbooks use or like don't use, that can have a huge impact on how we understand the past.
Oh, for sure. He has this whole section about how textbooks show the Vietnam War, and it's super interesting. Like, he talks about how they often leave out those really powerful photos, like that picture of the little girl running from the napalm attack or the evacuation from the Saigon rooftop. Those images are like burned into our minds, but you never see them in textbooks.
It's like this weird selective memory, right? If you leave out those images, the ones that make you uncomfortable, it kind of sanitizes war, you know? It
Mhm.
makes it harder to really get, like, the human cost of everything.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to protect us from the bad stuff in the past. But I don't know, don't you think that sometimes we need to feel a little uncomfortable to actually learn and grow?
I think Lowen would agree with you there. He says that looking at those hard parts of history, even if they make us uncomfortable, it's really important for learning to think critically and for developing empathy.
And it's not just about sanitizing wars either. Lowen also talks about how textbooks often present this like super optimistic, straightforward view of progress, like America's always moving forward, always getting better, which, let's be real, isn't always true.
Yeah, real life is messy, right? Lowen says that while some older textbooks might have gone overboard with this whole inevitable progress idea, these days, textbooks have almost gone the opposite way. Like, they just avoid talking about present-day problems altogether.
It's like we've gone from everything is awesome to let's just ignore all the problems.
It's interesting, right? Lowen actually thinks this might be because, culturally, we're kind of afraid to talk about negative things, like pointing out problems is unpatriotic or
So
something.
you're saying that by avoiding these like tough conversations, we're actually doing more harm than good.
Exactly. If we only ever look at this, like, sanitized, simplified version of history, we miss out on important lessons, you know, and we lose opportunities to grow.
This is where it all clicks for me, you know? Lowen isn't just saying, hey, textbooks are wrong. He's saying, hey, we need to be more critical about everything. Like, we need to be careful about what we believe and why we believe it, not just about history, but about everything.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this book so important. It's so relevant, even though it was written a while ago. He's giving us the tools to question the narratives we've been fed our whole lives and to search out a more, I don't know, more honest understanding of the past.
It really makes you think, like if textbooks are like glossing over stuff or even straight up getting things wrong, what other historical things that we just accept as true might need a second look. You know what I mean?
That's the big question Lowen leaves us with, right? Like, it reminds us that history isn't like this fixed thing. It's always changing, always being reinterpreted. And we're all part of that.
It's funny, I used to think history was just memorizing a bunch of names and dates, but this book totally changed how I see it. It's like history is alive and it's full of surprises and it matters now, like in our lives today.
It totally does. And that's why it's so important to, like, look at history with a critical eye, to question what we've been told, and to look for different perspectives.
Mm.
Like, don't just take the textbook version as the absolute truth. Dig deeper, ask questions, be open to having your mind changed.
Yeah, it's about being like a better citizen,
Yeah.
right? Not just like blindly accepting stuff, but actually being curious and trying to figure things out.
Exactly. And that's why Lies My Teacher Told Me is so powerful. It's not just about busting myths, it's about giving us the tools to think for ourselves, to be more informed and, well, just better citizens, like you said.
So, if you're ready to maybe have some of your ideas about American history challenged a little bit, if you're curious about those like hidden stories and voices, I highly recommend checking out Lies My Teacher Told Me. It's a book that really makes you think, and those thoughts stick with you.
For sure. It's like a call to action,
Yeah.
telling us to be more critical, to really think about the information we're given,
Yeah.
and to be part of creating a more accurate, more inclusive understanding of our past.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into Lies My Teacher Told Me. And remember, history is so much more than just facts and figures, right? It's this living, breathing thing that shapes the world we live in. So keep asking those questions, keep digging for answers, and keep the conversation going. We'll catch you next time.